This webinar is being put on today by the Ohio Trucking Association. My name is Tina Bell, and I'm the Marketing Manager for Vertical Alliance Group. I'm going to give you just a little bit of information about me, and then we're going to dive into today's topic. I've been with Vertical Alliance for a little over 2 years. We provide online training for the trucking industry, and so I have a fair amount of experience helping some of our clients create custom training or come up with ways on how to create custom training for their drivers. Outside of that, I spent 6 years in the urgent care industry, and during part of that tenure, I actually helped urgent care centers develop customized training for their facilities and helped spearhead some of the training programs at our own urgent care facility. So I have a fairly extensive background in training, and what I'm going to share with you today is information on how you can create your own custom training and how it actually improves engagement with your employees. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is where custom training is beneficial. And honestly, it's beneficial across just about anywhere in your company, but let's take a deeper dive into that. The first thing we want to talk about is there's a difference between training and learning. And for those of you that train your drivers on a regular basis, train your employees, you may or may not know this distinction. And this is one of my very, very favorite quotes that I think really highlights the difference between training and learning. You train dogs, seals, and monkeys, but people prefer to learn. What's the difference? Training focuses on a skill needed to perform a task today. Learning focuses on knowledge that can be used for a lifetime. Really, when you dive into that a little bit deeper, what that means is we often spend a lot of time going, how do we train somebody on a specific skill that they need to do a specific job? And that's important. And sometimes people master that right away, but what people really tend to master is when they learn something. And learning means we have to figure out how to apply things in a way that somebody can use it throughout their entire life. And I think it's really important that you understand really the difference between training and learning. We're not training animals, we're training people. And so if you can figure out how to apply what you're trying to teach them, how to apply it to their direct life, how it impacts them personally, and you can leave them with a personal message, they're going to learn and retain that longer. And so I wanted to start there. I also want to overcome a myth, and one of the biggest myths that we see as we work with clients on trying to figure out how to create custom training is that custom training is hard. Custom training really isn't hard. Custom training takes some time, and so I want to share with you a couple of tips on how to schedule that time in. And if you start working around this particular schedule, you'll realize how easy it actually is to create your custom training, your custom pieces for people. And we're going to talk about why that's important in a little bit as well. The first thing that I want to share with you is work smarter, not harder. Whenever I have a series of educational pieces that I need to create, the first thing I do is I just make sure that I set an appointment for 1 hour a week to create that employee training. And much the same as I would schedule an appointment with our CEO to talk about our latest initiatives, I'll schedule a 1 hour appointment with myself, and nothing will get in the way of that, no matter what. Just as I would keep the appointment with my CEO, as a training professional, I'm going to keep that 1 hour appointment with myself. And during that 1 hour every single week, I'm going to dedicate the time to create the training material. So the first tip that you need to write down and put a star beside is schedule a 1 hour appointment weekly to start creating your own training. Another thing that can work, and this is a tip that I've used multiple times, is schedule a webinar series for your employees on what you want them to know. So much like the Ohio Trucking Association put this webinar on today as part of their series, if you schedule a webinar series for your employees, even if you don't require them to come, simply by scheduling a set amount, let's say the second Tuesday of every single month at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you're going to run a webinar series teaching your employees whatever it is that you need to create training on. Even if only one of your employees shows up because it's not required, it forces you to create the materials and then to actually record the training. And we're going to talk about some platforms you can use to record training. But those are ways that you can work smarter and not harder and keep yourself on a timeline to create custom training. And why might you want to do this? Well, a skilled and trained workforce, these are some fun statistics. The IBM training, they put out a study called Building Skills for a Smarter Planet. And when they did that study, they found that skilled and trained workforces saw a 16% increase in customer satisfaction. How many of you out there would love to see a 16% increase in your customers out there and your shippers being more excited about the customer service you're delivering? They saw a 10% increase in productivity. What would a 10% increase in productivity mean to your trucking company's bottom line? And here's a kicker. They saw a 22% increase in faster rollout of processes. I know the average right now, there's a large number of trucking companies out there right now that are looking, how do we roll out ELDs this year? What if you could have a skilled and trained workforce and roll out your new ELDs 20% faster this year? So creating custom training is worth that time, and that's why I start by saying schedule appointments, schedule times that you can work on creating custom training for your drivers and your employees. Now, what are ways that you might actually use custom content? Where are some things that you can look at? CDL training. You could do pre-trip on your own truck, or if we have any motor coach carriers here on the call, or your own bus. And you can use a quiz for retraining. So before they go out and take a CDL exam, you can put them on to go out and do a pre-trip on your actual truck. The trucks they're going to be doing it on. Videotape that and use that as a training tool. What about dash cam videos whenever there's an accident that happens? Do you have a way that you can put them onto a system and assign them out for review, or gather up a certain number of them, blur out whoever the driver is, and put those together as a safety training message for the month if you start noticing trends? Orientation and onboarding. Every company does things a little bit differently, and so you can create customized training for your orientation and your onboarding. One of the things that you might think about with orientation is how much time does somebody in payroll spend explaining exactly what we need and how our payroll process works? How much time does somebody in your benefits or HR department spend going over what the health insurance is? Instead of bringing them into every single orientation that you have, you can pre-record that. Anything that has to do with just explaining basic paperwork, pre-record that, put it on a video. We actually have clients that do their orientations, cut their orientations down by as much as 2 days, and have drivers complete that customized training video before they ever come in to the company. So they've completed those trainings before they ever came in. And it also, think about all the time that it now saves, where you're no longer having to pull people in to repeat the same information week after week or month after month, depending on how frequently you do orientations. Another great area where you might consider creating custom training is look for areas where you continually have problems. One of my favorite stories that I like to share is we had a client who they repeatedly had drivers going to the same drop-off spot, and they would not remember to put their parking brake on, and they were having a lot of problems, obviously, if you're not putting that on. And so they went out to the area and they said, look, when you pull up to this area and you go to park, you have to hit your parking brake. This is what the area looks like. And within 2 weeks of assigning out that training, the problem managed to fix itself. We had another company who one of their drivers was involved in an accident where they were using their cell phone and should not have been. And immediately after that happened, they created a custom training piece and sent it out to everybody at their company and said, look, this is our stance on it. This is why. And here's a real life story of what just happened to one of our drivers. It could be you next. So they're powerful. So look at areas where you have problems and start going, okay, how could we create a training video on this and train our employees on it, and use our people. We already talked about in the orientation where you could explain company health insurance benefits and save your HR department a lot of time because they're giving that same spiel over and over. Now, instead of them coming in to give the spiel, all they have to do is come in and ask questions, and that can save them a lot of time. If you're a chemical hauler or a hazmat hauler, are there special ways that you should handle chemicals? We have a lot of custom training that our clients do where they go through, look, this is how you handle it. This is what you need to wear. This is our requirements for this. This is the requirements that our shippers have. All of that in a special customized video. This may sound silly, but the proper way to change a tire when you're on the side of the road. We've had clients that have put videos up like that where they've custom done it. They've had their maintenance foreman, their shop foreman actually go out on the side of the road in a safe area and film a custom video of, if you're out here, here's the proper way to change your own tire if you're able to do that. Other things that you could create custom videos on, daily health tips. Do you have somebody on your team that's a health guru that would love to just give daily or weekly or monthly health tips to keep your drivers safe when they're out there on the road? Or what about videos explaining your physical and drug testing requirements? Those are all areas where you might consider using custom content. Another area for those of you who are rolling out ELDs or who have already rolled out ELDs, we have clients that have actually taken their either their smartphones or video cameras out into the truck, and they've actually, one person's held the camera and somebody else has pointed out, this is how you use this portion of the ELD system and this is why. This is how you use this portion of the ELD system and this is why. This is how you use this and this is why. And then they've divided that up into small sections and they've put that onto the system. Where that's beneficial is not only can you assign that out to the driver before you go and show them how to use the ELD in the cab, it's also beneficial when they're out there on the side of the road and they forget how to access something. They forget how to do something. They're going down the road and now you're trying to walk them through it and they're looking at the screen and they're puzzled. Now you can actually say, well, look, we have this video online. Why don't you go rewatch it, see if it will help answer your questions. And they have something that they can see and utilize. And we have a lot of clients that are now creating custom training around ELDs. It's a really popular topic right now. A couple of other things that you might consider for custom content. Proper use of auxiliary power units. It can reduce your need to idle trucks and reduce fuel waste. If you have safety or training meetings, film those. Instead of just bringing your expert in or you as the safety director getting up in front of the company and speaking one time and only reaching 40% of your audience, film it. And then everybody that misses it, now you don't have to bring them in one-on-one. Use that as a safety training on its own that you can assign out a video and put a quiz behind it to make sure that they understand what was said. Other things that may not seem like they're custom training, but they are, is acknowledgement of company policies and policy revisions. Sometimes when I'm talking to bus people, and we're going to kind of skip over that, is how do you buckle students onto the bus? But another thing for those of you in the trucking industry to think about is new safety equipment, a training video. Whenever you bring on some type of new safety equipment, have somebody on your team film how to introduce it. Why are we, what's the reason for it? Why did our company decide to implement this new equipment? And then demonstrate how to use the equipment. Now, creating the training video does not take away actually doing the in-person training, but what it does is when you have remedial training down the road, you can assign out the video. When you realize somebody's not properly using that safety equipment, assign it out with somebody from your company, teaching somebody, look, this is how you do it. This is why we do it at our company. This is why we believe in this, and it's for your safety. And again, have somebody local that people feel connected to demonstrate how to use that safety equipment. So we've talked about a lot of ideas for using custom training. Now what I want to talk about is ways to actually create that custom training. I hope your brain's going, okay, I'm getting there. I'm really excited about doing this. Let's talk about the importance of images when you're creating training documents. Whether it's a PowerPoint presentation, it's an in-person presentation, it's a handout, images have a very, very powerful role. For example, did you know that users retain 10 to 20% of written or spoken information? That's it. We are so bombarded with information on a daily basis that only 10 to 20% of what we hear or see written is retained in our brains. But studies show that we retain 65% of visual information. You may want to write that down and star it. We retain 65% of visual information. Think about it. Visuals stick in long-term memory. Now, what I just showed you over here probably wouldn't have stuck with you as long or as powerful as seeing the two images that you see on the screen. And this is where infographics have really taken the world by storm, and I'm sure you see infographics on a regular basis. They've actually, in a lot of marketing and sales things, infographics have replaced what is commonly called the white paper, because what marketing and sales studies have found, and they echo what training studies have found, is people remember images, and images are a lot more powerful. So think about that as you're going through creating your training. How can you incorporate visuals? Did you know that 40% of learners respond better to visual information than to plain text alone? It's kind of, even if you haven't even processed it before, it's almost like a no-brainer when you even start to think about how you learn. From the time we're little, from the time we're children, we learn by pictures. I have a 3-year-old who can literally read an entire storybook for me and not even read because of the pictures. She knows what the pictures say. I have read the words to her so much that she can now tell me that story, but it's solely from the pictures, because 40% of what we learn is really visual. Remember what we said just a second ago, 65% of what we retain is visual, and 40% of learners respond better to visual information than to plain text alone. And it's important that you understand there are various types of learners. We don't all learn the same way. So as you're working on creating things, you need to create training documents that appeal to both the visual learner, to the auditory learner, and to the person who responds better learning by written words. And so that is where a video training really kind of ties into all three. You hit the auditory learner, you hit the visual learner, and you hit the learner who responds good to text. One of the things that we've all heard is a picture is worth 1,000 words. Images communicate concepts more effectively. Now, you guys know that we are an online training provider, so I could stand here and tell you things like online training decreases the amount of employee paperwork you have to file. It makes finding employee training records easier if you need them during an audit or court deposition. And I guarantee you a large portion of you didn't take in what I just said. On the flip side, I could have this up on the screen and I could say, online training decreases the amount of employee paperwork. How many of you ever feel like you're buried in a mountain of paperwork? And instead, it makes it easier for you to find employee training records if you need them during an audit or court deposition. It's all in your hands anywhere you're at in the world because your records are stored online. It's a very big difference. Notice the difference in the power of a slide without images and the power of a slide with images, both used to depict the exact same story. A picture truly is worth 1,000 words. So a couple of tips for using images. If you haven't spent a lot of time learning about images, working with them in your career, there are things that you're going to want to learn. The first tip is you want to avoid low resolution images. I like to explain what low resolution means by talking about pixels and comparing them to a rock. You may have heard people talk before about 72 dpi, 300 dpi, and you may have had no clue what that meant. dpi stands for dots per inch. When you're talking about a computer screen or a computer training, most of the things you create are created at what's called 72 dpi, which is 72 dots per inch. When you're creating something that's going to be printed, it's created at 300 dpi, or 300 dots per inch. So let's look at the square on the right. The square on the right represents, for all intents purposes, an inch. So if you look at that, now obviously it's bigger than an inch, but we're going to pretend it's an inch. It's filled with rocks. If we're talking about pixels, that means if we're printing something at 72 dpi, that means there's 72 dots in that inch. If we're printing something at 300 dpi, it means there's 300 dots in that inch. So sometimes what you may notice is you find a picture somewhere and you try to make it bigger, and as you stretch it, it gets fuzzy. It gets fuzzy because those 72 dots in an inch or 300 dots in an inch can only spread out so far before there are not enough dots to fill things up. So one of the things, if you start noticing that your stuff is fuzzy, that's because certain pictures can only be expanded so far, and it has to do with the number of pixels that are in that picture. So you want to avoid those low resolution small images in your training so it looks clearer and crisper. Another important tip is to avoid stolen images. This is probably the most important tip that I can give you when you're creating your training documents. A lot of times it's habit to Google, I want a picture of whatever the topic is. You type it into Google and then you hit that images box. The problem is Google images are not royalty free. A lot of those images, they're just searching websites people own. They own the rights to them, and they can sue you if you use the images without their permission, without purchasing them, or without giving you the rights to use them. So it's important for you to understand that Google Images is not the place to go to get images. And in just a second, we're going to talk about some places you can go to get free images and paid images. We learned this story the hard way several years ago. Actually, it was prior to me coming here, but we still learned the story, or learned this the hard way when we had somebody who took an image against our policy, used it, probably could have purchased a very similar image for about $30 and ended up having to pay over $800 to use the image that we had used because we had used it in other materials. And so I encourage you to avoid stolen images. If you don't have an image use policy at your company right now, you need to create an image use policy. If you'd like a sample one, let me know. I can email one to you that you can implement where people understand where it is and is not okay to get images from. So now let's look at some places where you can get free images. There are 3 sites, stocksnap.io, picjumbo.com, and pexels.com. Those 3 sites are great places to go to get free images. They are free for commercial use. They're under what's called the Creative Commons license, and Creative Commons means free for commercial use or personal use, either one. And they're just photographers out there who take pictures. They like taking pictures, and they're just donate their pictures to the world to use. There are a lot of sites out there where you can pay. iStockPhoto.com is one that we use on a regular basis. There's a lot of out there that you pay. Just remember, if you're on a site where it's paid, a lot of the times they'll have watermarks on them. You cannot use the image with the watermark on it in your training materials or other materials. You have to pay for that image, so don't get yourself in trouble. Ways to create and edit videos. There are some platforms that I like to use. If you have a Windows computer, often a lot of Windows computers come with a free app called Windows Movie Maker. While you can't do a lot of over-the-top stuff, if you just want to make some basic edits, divide a video into a few parts, Windows Movie Maker is a great app for that. If maybe you recorded something and midway through you had to pause, and then you started over on a second video. Well, you can edit out that pause and merge the 2 videos together using Windows Movie Maker, and you don't have to have a high-tech authoring system. There's a Slice app on the phone the Splice app on your phone that you can download that works great for splicing videos together as well. Again, these aren't for high-tech productions, but a lot of the custom training videos that we make don't have to be high-tech. How can you enhance your images? If you're lucky and you have somebody on your team that uses Photoshop, Photoshop is my very favorite tool. But again, it takes some time to learn, and it's expensive. It's about $70 a month to have access to it. And you may not have somebody on your team that knows it or can use it. You may not have a graphic designer on your team. So on your phone, Adobe has a free app. It's called Adobe Spark Post. That's great for creating images. They have some templates you can use, words. They have color schemes that work together. So if you don't have a great graphics background, Adobe Spark Post can still make you look like you do. PicMonkey and Canva are 2 other places that allow you to edit your photos with a lot of cool features that you don't really have to have a lot of graphics design background to use. So those are some sites that I would encourage you to use. And then if you're looking at wanting to make infographics, Visualize.me and Pictochart.com are 2 free platforms that allow you to make infographics. And again, as we talked about earlier, infographics are really becoming a great training tool, a great way to get a message across to other people. And they're fairly easy to learn. Obviously, you have to have your information, your statistics, but the apps or the platforms make it fairly easy for you to create your infographics. And there's another app on the phone that allows you to make a picture collage called the LiPix app. And it's another app that you may just want to have out there if you're using smartphones to create some of your custom training stuff. Again, if you don't have a graphics or a videography team, these are some ways that you can get around that without having to spend a lot of money, but you don't have to overcomplicate or allow the fact that you don't have a graphic designer or a videographer on your staff. Don't let that complicate or stop you from creating your own videos or your own training materials. The next tip that I want to share with you is how beneficial it is to use metaphors and similes when you're creating training. Now, we all know what a metaphor or simile is, but quick reminder, they simplify concepts. So how do you use a metaphor or a simile? Well, the first thing is think of a point you want to make. Think through it and then say, okay, how could I use a stock image to showcase the comparison? It's important that you use metaphors and similes your audience is familiar with, so you don't want to use something that just totally doesn't relate to your audience. I'll give you an example of something that may not relate to an audience. When I worked in the urgent care field and we were out teaching urgent care business owners how to grow their business, one of the metaphors that we used is if you have a problem in your business, you don't necessarily want to grow it. You don't want to grow a tumor. Well, that made sense to doctors. But if I was going to talk to a trucking company about growing problems in their business, using the example of a tumor, and you don't want to grow a tumor, while it might resonate, that particular metaphor doesn't resonate as well with that industry as it does within the medical industry. So let's look at some metaphors and similes that might work for training you might be doing. Oftentimes, you may have to tell somebody, use the refresh button on your internet browser. And while to some of you the refresh button makes sense, to other people who are not as computer literate, they have no clue what it means. And so what you may say is the refresh button is like a C with an arrow on the top. And you can see how, look up at the top of your browser for the icon that looks like a C with an arrow on the top of it. That's a great simile, a great use of a simile in your training. It compares something. Everybody should know what the letter C is. Everybody should know what an arrow is. And using that simile makes it easier to explain what a refresh button is to somebody who has no clue what it is. Let's look at a metaphor and example that may work for you with your drivers. We need to get the load there as quickly as possible. Time is money. Instead of just putting the words time is money on the screen, you can use a stock photo. This is a stock photo with another stock photo imaged over it. Obviously, the time is money. These images were taken from the sites we talked about earlier and were easy to not only create, but then put into the training program. So that's where similes and metaphors are really beneficial when you're creating custom training. Another thing that is very, very powerful, it's probably the most powerful tool at all with training, is creating stories and scenarios that go along with your training. I found this fascinating when I first started studying creating training, and it came from a book that I read called Made to Stick by Dan and Chip Heath. And they said that after a presentation, 63% of attendees remember stories, but only 5% of attendees remember statistics. Now think about it. I've already thrown a lot of statistics at you. How many of the statistics do you remember? It's funny, we often joke about statistics. You'll hear people, one of my very favorite presenters, Brandon Johnson, whenever he speaks, he'll talk about all of these statistics, and then he'll say, and motivational speakers are known to make up 100% of the statistics they share. And it always makes everybody stop and laugh. But the key there is we throw so many numbers at people, and they don't stick. What does stick are stories. I want to share another one of my very favorite things that kind of highlights this. We're programmed to tune out. I encourage you to write down theinvisiblegorilla.com. Go to that website when we get off of today's presentation. I'm going to spoil this for you, but on that website you're going to find the Invisible Gorilla video. And this is a great training video when you're talking with anybody on your team that works with training other people. In the video, 6 people pass basketballs around. As you're watching the video, you tell people in the audience to keep silent and count the number of passes made by the people in the white shirts. At some point, a gorilla actually strolls into the middle of the action, faces the camera, and thumps on its chest. Then it leaves. It spends a total of 9 seconds on the screen. When I was doing training in the urgent care field, we played this video at 5 conferences a year. Every single time, over half of the people who watched the video and counted the passes literally missed the gorilla walking through on the screen. It was as though the gorilla was completely and totally invisible. So what does this mean for you? It means we're missing a lot of what goes on around us, and we have no idea that we're missing so much. This particular, the Invisible Gorilla experiment was eye-opening to me as I watched it done group in front of group in front of group. And I encourage you to incorporate it, if nothing else, into your next management training meeting, perhaps even into your next dispatcher training meeting. Why? Because so often, how many times do you hear people say, well, I told him that 5 times. I've told him that 3 times. I've told him that already. Why didn't they catch it? Think about how often we throw information at people. We are all programmed to tune out. Half of you are probably tuned out at this particular point in time, and you're in and out of doing other tasks. That's why continual and ongoing training is important, That's why I'm so grateful to those of you that took time out today to come and learn how you can create custom training, ongoing training that you can continually keep in front of your drivers and your employees, because we're programmed to tune out. So the more that we keep safety training in front of people, the more likely we are to save lives on the interstate. Stories are memorable. I guarantee you're going to remember the gorilla story if you remember nothing else from this particular webinar. Stories turn boring material into something exciting. So you can use stories in a lot of different ways. First off, whenever your employees share empowering stories about how they interacted with a client, how they made the difference in the life of somebody on the side of the road, how they fixed something, how they helped another employee, how they went above and beyond, video them. Say, hey, that's a great story. I'd love to use that as training. Could I get you on film? Could I interview you about that for just 10 minutes? And bam, you have an amazing, powerful story. One of my very favorite stories, I call it the Santa Claus story, came from a trainer. He's a safety trainer for a school bus barn in Texas, a school down near the Longview, Texas area. And I was asking him, I said, share with me some training ideas for training your drivers. What do you do? How do you get student management? Now, while student management doesn't apply to the truck drivers, he said, well, for me it's a little different. The kids used to call me Santa Claus. I look like Santa Claus. I play the Santa Claus in our town. And he went through this entire story about how he played Santa Claus. And we probably talked for about 2 hours, and this has been a year or more ago. And while I remember a lot of the things that he said, what stuck with me was how he talked all about playing Santa Claus. He walked through stories. He walked through actual interactions with the kids. That has stuck with me to this day. And so I call it the Santa Claus story because your trucking company is full of Santa Clauses. They are full of people who have stories that are powerful, that are way more impactful than any canned training program out there and any canned training video. And those stories are what start to make your company sticky. They make people want to stay with you because they build family. So when you find those powerful stories, when you hear somebody talking about them, they're in your company. Get somebody on camera. Doesn't take long. We all have smartphones. Pop up your smartphone and say, hey, that's great. Could we film this because I'd like to share it with everybody else? And it makes people in your company feel appreciated too. Whoa, we zoomed in. There we go. The next thing that I want to share with you is how to use humor. Humor, we all like to laugh. I'm not sure that there's a person on this call that doesn't like to laugh. So how do you use humor? Well, let's look at a couple of things. First, you want to make sure that it's inspirational and it's positive. So there's a lot of negative humor out there that, yeah, it's funny, but it breeds negativity. So you want to make sure that you avoid that and you focus on inspirational and positive things. You also want to avoid offensive humor. We've all heard those jokes that, wow, you call them the dirty jokes, they're offensive, that maybe they make fun of another group. You want to keep that out. And that probably goes without saying because you guys all understand EEOC, harassment, and those types of things. And we want to keep those out of your training. One fun thing, especially if you're doing a training in person, if you've never heard this, it's called the 3-tiered raise your hand line. And basically, you think of something, a point that you want to make. So and then you kind of scale it down. If I'm going to talk to a group about working with children, an example might be raise your hand if you have children at home. And a large portion of the room is going to raise their hand, but there's going to be a section that doesn't. Then I'll say, raise your hand if you have worked with children. And a small portion of the room will raise their hand. And then I'm going to say, raise your hand if you've ever seen a kid. Now that kind of goes, we don't stop, we don't say I'm going to say, it just kind of goes in that pattern. And by the time you get to the raise your hand if you've ever seen a kid, it's a no-brainer. Everybody in the audience has seen a kid. At some point in their life, they were a kid, and it always brings a chuckle. It works better in a group of about 15 to 20 or more than it does in a small group, but it is a great way for those of you that are presenting in front of people to start incorporating humor. The key is that the last line always applies to the entire audience, and I like to call it the no-brainer humor. For those of you that are looking for some fun safety videos, there's a website out there that you may want to write down. It's called creativesafetypublishing.com, and if you do /10-funny-safety-videos, there's actually 10 funny safety videos that while you need to look into the copyright use on if you can or can't use them, why I really want you to go check these out is because they give you ideas of what other companies have done to create humorous safety videos, because safety is a serious topic, but we remember humorous things, and sometimes it's okay to put a funny spin on things as long as it's done tastefully. And you'll have to find what works for your company and your company's culture, but this is a great site to go to check out what other companies out there have done to put a humorous spin on some of those safety topics. The next thing is you want to use current events. This is a great and easy way to create custom training. Let's walk through some examples. First, did you know that readers are leaders? I know, we've all heard that saying, but it's true. If you haven't heard these statistics before, think about how these people got to where they were or got to where they are. Warren Buffett spends 5 to 6 hours per day reading. That's 5 newspapers and 500 pages of corporate reports. Bill Gates reads 50 books a year. Mark Zuckerberg reads 1+ books every 2 weeks. And Mark Cuban, one of my favorites, reads more than 3 hours daily. Arthur Blank reads 2 hours a day. David Rubenstein reads 6 books a week, and Dan Gilbert reads 1 to 2 hours a day. Those are some powerful leaders, and they got to be leaders because they were continual learners. A lot of the times, one of the things that was honed into me, I was at a conference once, and I was told that the average person never picks up a book after they leave high school, unless they've gone on to college, and then the average person never picks up a book after they leave college. Think about your workforce, and it's kind of scary. We quit reading when we quit being required to read. So we quit learning when we quit being required to learn. Well, that's kind of scary when you think about all of the changes that are continually going on in our industry. So your management team is probably reading industry trends. They're reading things like Transport Topics, Commercial Carrier Journal, Overdrive. They're getting the Ohio Trucking Association newsletters from the ATA, TCA. This is a snapshot of my inbox, just one little small portion of it. Once a day, every single day, I take at least 30 minutes just to read industry news. But it doesn't do much good if I'm the only person that reads industry news, and I don't share it with others in my company who may not take 30 minutes or an hour a day to read that industry news, especially when something important is impacting our industry. So how do we pass that down? Well, there are a couple of ways that you can do that, and we're going to talk about those in a second. But I want to ask you this. What are your employees reading? Information is not memorable unless people can see how to apply that knowledge in the real world. One of the greatest advantages of online training is your ability to incorporate case studies from current news stories into your training. So what are your employees reading? How are you incorporating what's going on right there, right now in our world around us, and how are you letting your employees know how to respond to it? This is a scenario you guys probably all remember from last year. Last year in the summer, we had demonstrations going on everywhere, and demonstrators were literally shutting down the interstate. Now what are your drivers supposed to do? We had loads being lost. You guys remember that. A lot of you probably went through it. And so we reached out to a friend of ours, John Derenberg at the FNCSA, and we said, John, help us figure out what are the drivers supposed to do, and we created a flyer. And we created a slide and a training video, and we reached out to all of our clients and said, here's what we have. If you have drivers out there right now and you want to let them know what they need to do to be sure that they're in compliance with hours of service, here's what they need to do, and here's that piece. You can do the same thing when current events are happening and they're impacting your drivers quickly and easily. It doesn't have to be anything over the top. What you're looking at here is a one-page slide, or it could have just been a one-page Word document with information that you can quickly disseminate out. That's custom training. Don't leave your drivers out there unaware of what's going on in the industry around them. Keep them updated. Keep them posted as quick as this literally we had thrown together in about 2 hours outside of the research time. Now, I'm not saying thrown together, but what I want to demonstrate here, or I'm not saying thrown together to take away from the seriousness, what I want to demonstrate here is that it doesn't take a lot of time to take current events, turn them into custom training, and educate your entire workforce. Number 6, we want to stop knowledge leak. What do I mean by stopping knowledge leak? Our workforce, your workforce, you as an individual, lose 30% of your skills annually if they're not routinely enforced. Let me give you an example. Nurses. When I worked in the urgent care setting, they don't do a lot of splints on a regular basis. And so when all of a sudden that random volar splint presents itself, before they go into a room, we had training videos that we custom made teaching a reminder of how to put that splint on. So we didn't have to bring a physician in to stand there with the nurse to make sure they were refreshed on it. They watched that video before they ever went into the room. I'll give you an example that will hit a little bit closer to home with this industry. Your drivers. How often do you see your fuel mileage start to creep back up because drivers forget those best practices? We have companies that on a regular basis sign out our 26-week fuel efficiency series and see massive improvement when they spend that 26 weeks reminding drivers these are the best practices to keep fuel mileage at the level that we expect as a company, that it's not going to cost us an arm and a leg, that we can save on our fuel. Think about those of you who are trainers. You started out as drivers and now you're working in the office. Maybe it's been 6 years or more since you really spent time as a driver. And now all of a sudden you get to go out and drive. We hear from drivers on a regular basis, or we hear from trainers on a regular basis that say, man, I just didn't realize how much that I had forgot. It's not your fault. We are programmed to lose about 30% of our knowledge on a regular basis. If you want to stop that knowledge leak, you have to do continual training. So how do you keep intellectual capital at your company? That's the intellectual capital that you've invested in. You hired somebody for skills, and they're losing 30% of those skills on a regular basis. Your custom training is important. Capture the people who know how to do things great. Get them on film talking about it while it's fresh on their mind, and then use that as refresher training as needed when you bring on new people. Policies and procedures is custom training. Let's delve into that a little bit more. Your employee handbooks, your health and company benefit information, your company driver requirements, your inclement weather policy, your company forms. How many of you, let's just think about it, how many of you remember your first day on the job when somebody handed you a great big handbook? How many of you actually read the entire handbook? And if you did, how much of it did you actually retain? We don't. Yet we continue to hand employees day after day the same Microsoft Office printed document or hand them an Adobe PDF handbook and say, well, I've given you the policies. Now imagine if you took each of those policies and you made them fun. You made just a quick little video talking about why the company adopted the policy, why it's important. And instead of handing somebody an entire book, please feel free to continue to keep handing them the entire book. But now your handbook becomes a living, breathing video that you've walked through. We've talked about the health and company benefit information. Think about the inclement weather policy. What do you do when there's bad weather? What is your company's policy? And is it something that people remember? That's actually a fun video. We've seen some fun ones that people have created. Other ways you can create custom training. Your company newsletters, company memos. Recognizing employees on their birthdays. Now you may be going, how is that company training? Well, it's not necessarily custom training, but taking time to create a happy birthday video from your management team and sending it out to your drivers on their birthday, how powerful is that? How many companies out there are taking the time to do something like that? Years of service awards, again, going back to that company newsletter, publishing those and recognizing people on a regular basis. Well, it's not company training, it's appreciation. It's showing appreciation. And you know, in a lot of ways, that's motivational. And so I guess you can tie that into training because we all need motivation. We talked already about sharing industry news and new regulations. It's important that you guys are creating training around that your drivers are up to date on the latest regulations. And one of my favorite things that I think you could probably take away from this is a timely message from the CEO. How easy would it be once a month or once a quarter for you to sit down with your CEO, pop up an iPhone or a video on a tripod and just say, you know what, let's give a 2-minute message to the drivers about what's going on at our company. Let's let them feel connected to you as a person. Keep a face on this company. We have on our system, we have several of our clients that have a welcome message from their CEO every single month. And it's assigned out to them, and then it stays on the driver's page. And it allows the CEO to really communicate with their drivers in a way that we just weren't able to do before. The technology exists out there. Keep your CEO connected to the drivers. Now, how do we turn PowerPoints into videos? This is probably the easiest way to create custom training videos, and it's really, really easy to do. Once you've created a PowerPoint, and that's what you're looking at here, our GoToWebinar platform is a PowerPoint, you can actually record a video as you record your PowerPoint. Much like if I was walking through here, I could actually have this record a video, and then when I hit the Save As button, there's an export option to create a video. And I created a short link, a bit.ly link, that if you want to write that down, it'll actually walk you step by step through how to save your PowerPoints and record them as videos. That's the quickest way to turn a PowerPoint with VoiceOver into a training video. And then the platform we're on today is called GoToWebinar. This webinar has an option when you record it that you can hit, or when you're playing it, you can hit a record button and it records everything. You don't have to have anybody attend the webinar to actually record it, so you could use GoToWebinar to record PowerPoints if you don't want to use the PowerPoint create a video option. AnyMeeting is another platform similar to GoToWebinar. You can do the exact same thing. And there's a lot of companies out there, Vertical Alliance Group is one of them, that has a video production department that if you just simply want to write a script, you don't like your voice, you can reach out to a company with a video production department, send them the script and the PowerPoint, and they'll turn it into a PowerPoint for you. So PowerPoints are probably the easiest way to create custom training videos. If you want to go high tech, you don't want to just use your smartphone, you want to create your own film studio, you can actually easily create a teleprompter. It costs you about $35 to $50. Here's the stuff that you need. You can see a makeshift teleprompter here. You need a beam splitter glass, 2 picture frames, a mat board, hinges. This particular one that we have built here and that I'm showcasing here, we actually just use an iPad and the beam splitter glass. So you can see for about $50 you can create a teleprompter, get a chair and a tripod, and ta-da, you have your own professional recording studio. So a lot of the times I think we think stuff has to be high tech, and it really doesn't. We are so lucky to live in the era of technology at our fingertips, and it is so easy and affordable now to create things. So again, going back to your CEO creating a message, you create this teleprompter for about $50. He writes his message out once a month. You plop him down in a chair or plop her down in a chair and record them, and you're talking about 15 minutes worth of time total, and then man, you have your training video and your training message done. So it doesn't have to be over the top. Another way to do it is you can create an iPad film studio, and I have up here about what it costs you and where you can build one. We offer an event. We just finished one that was co-hosted with the Ohio Trucking Association called Boot Camp twice a month. And when you come to the boot camp, we actually teach you in depth how to create a custom safety training video. And the setup that we use is very similar to this setup. We call it the iPad Film Studio. And we use that on purpose. We want you to understand how easy it is to create a film studio. And this particular setup, counting the cost of the iPads, you're a little under $1,000. But again, the iPad, you can use it to both film and as a teleprompter, and you don't have to build the other teleprompter. So it's fairly easy and inexpensive to even create your own film studio within your own organization without having to go over the top. The key here, and the 10th thing that I want to talk about today, is creating a culture of learning at your company. And I'm probably preaching to the choir here because you all opted to come to a webinar about creating custom training to improve engagement. Did you know, and you probably did, that companies lose 25% of their staff in the first 45 days? You guys know that within the trucking industry, drivers make the decision, studies show, within 72 hours if they're going to leave a company, and within 60 days, drivers actually make the final decision to leave. And the average cost is somewhere between $3,000 to $18,000 to replace a new employee. 8 to 12 months. This was eye-opening to me when I first started studying training. 8 to 12 months is how long it takes a new hire to become completely proficient in their role. So we hire somebody and we give them what? Typically, the answer is what? 90 days? 90 days to become proficient in their role. That's the standard probationary period. Yet study after study shows it takes us 8 to 12 months. And we do all of our training in the first 90 days. Ongoing training, guys, is critical. Write that down, start. Ongoing training is critical, 8 to 12 months in that first year to get somebody proficient and up to speed. 86% of new hires decide to stay with the company long-term in the first 6 months. Again, in the trucking industry, companies that we work with and studies show within the first 72 hours to the first 60 days. Industry or national, all companies combined, it's the first 6 months. And here, this is a fantastic statistic. 79% of new hires intend to leave a company not offering training for the current job. 79%. We have a driver turnover crisis. It's getting better. The numbers are better, but it's still a crisis across the nation. And yet we know the statistics show that 79% of new hires intend to leave a company not offering training for their current job. What type of training can you offer? I hope today I've given you a lot of ideas that can help you figure out and plug that. You want to create a culture of learning. You want to encourage employees to learn on their own. What type of podcast can you make available for them? What type of audiobooks, TED Talks, or YouTube videos? Here's one. Ask them to train others and share their new skills. If you have an employee that absolutely loves podcasts and they're listening all the time and they come to you, you have a driver that says, I just heard this great podcast on whatever it was, or I was listening and I heard this on the radio, or whatever that is, and I just think it would be great. And you're like, yeah, I wish we could train everybody else on it. Then ask your employee to train them. Say, can we film you talking about that? Or would you like to come to our next safety meeting and talk about that? That's how you start to begin creating a culture of learning. There are companies out there that have audiobooks. They have one company sign into an audiobook platform, and they've purchased a certain set of audiobooks that people can access and listen to. You want to facilitate mentoring. Set up a mentor program for your new employees. Do you have a driver mentor program out there? If you don't, consider setting one up. Facilitate mentoring of your new drivers with your seasoned drivers. Consider mentoring, facilitate it between your driver managers, your newest driver manager, and your driver manager that all of the drivers love. Set up a social media group for idea exchange. There are a lot of companies that have private Facebook groups where drivers share ideas. They share things that are going on. I follow a lot of our clients on Facebook and absolutely love to see Flatbed Fridays where they're showing pictures of their drivers sending in different pictures of their flatbeds out there. Social media is a huge part of who we are, and with millennials coming in more and more into our workforce, it's only going to become a bigger part of who we are. So as you work on creating a culture of learning, these are ways that you can do that. A reading program tied to bonus eligibility. Most employees think they deserve a pay raise at their annual review. One of my former bosses and mentors' philosophy was, I'm not going to pay you more simply because you managed not to get fired in the first year. I'll pay you more because you've grown in your skill set and your ability. And he always held true to that. If you could come in and say, these are the things that I learned, and this is why I'm better than I was before, I'll increase your pay or I'll give you a bonus. But it's how he started to create a culture of learning within his company. As Jim Rohn once said, you can work hard at your job and you can make a living. You can work hard on yourself and you can make a fortune. My final thoughts that I want to share with you, and then I'll open this to questions if you have some, is the long-term effects of not learning are just as insidious as the long-term effects of not having a healthy lifestyle. The CEO of AT&T makes this point loud and clear in an interview with the New York Times when he says that those who don't spend at least 5 to 10 hours a week learning online will obsolete themselves with technology. Now, you may not have 5 to 10 hours a week to spend learning, but if you really think about it, how much time do you spend reading articles like the Commercial Carrier Journal or Overdrive? That's learning. How much time do you spend on LinkedIn reading about industry things? That's learning. My hunch is everybody on the webinar today is committed to learning. Now, what can you do to go out and make sure that your entire workforce is committed to learning as well? How can you create a true culture of learning? I hope some of the things that I've shared with you today have helped you answer that question, have inspired you. If you have any questions for me, I will definitely stay on for the next 5 minutes or so or longer. Feel free to put them in there. If you would like a copy of the presentation today, if you'll type just shoot me an email. My email's on the screen. I'll send you a copy of the presentation. If you'd like to discuss these ideas in more detail, My phone number's on the screen or my email, and I would absolutely love to discuss those with you. So if you have any additional questions, let me know, and I would be glad to take those now. In the interim, while I'm giving you just a few minutes to see if somebody types those in, I would again like to thank Sam and the Ohio Trucking Association for the opportunity to share this information with you today. I would like to thank each of you for the time that you took out today. I know anytime you give a little bit of your time, other stuff tends to fall by the wayside. So thank you for being committed to learning. Thank you for today's webinar. I don't see any questions that have come in. Again, please feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions or you want to bounce ideas on custom training. One of my very favorite topics, so I'd love to speak with you. And hopefully we'll talk again soon. Maybe the Ohio Trucking Association will invite us back for a future webinar. Thank you, guys. And the last thing I would like to share with you guys is, will the PowerPoint presentation be available? Tim, shoot me an email, tbell@verticalag.com. I'll shoot a copy of it over to you just as soon as I get your email, and that goes to any of you still on the call. Just shoot me an email, tbell@verticalag.com, and I'll send you over a copy of the PowerPoint. Thank you all again for attending. Thank you to the Ohio Trucking Association. From everyone at Vertical Alliance Group, happy learning. Bye-bye.